Football has its sacred numbers. 2,000 rushing yards in a season, the standard that turns workhorses into legends. 20 receiving touchdowns, a measurement of dominance on the perimeter. 20 sacks, the calling card of a defender who breaks protection schemes and quarterbacks alike. Other sports have their own mythic figures. Wilt Chamberlain's 100 points, Wayne Gretzky's 200-point seasons, Joe DiMaggio's 56-game hitting streak. But in professional football, for quarterbacks, the magic number is 7. 7 touchdown passes in one game. In more than a century of professional play, across tens of thousands of contests, only 8 men have ever thrown 7 touchdowns on a single day. 8. Fewer than the people who have walked on the moon, fewer than the number of baseball pitchers with perfect games, fewer than the Super Bowls won by some dynasties. The scarcity itself is part of the aura. It tells you instantly that when 7 happens, it's not normal variation. It's an eclipse, rare, dazzling, and unforgettable. 7 demands a perfect convergence. Volume matters. You can't reach 7 without sustained passing, without possessions that keep ending in throws across the goal line. Efficiency matters. Incompletions, stall drives, sacks end sequences, turnovers erase opportunities. Coaching matters. A head coach and play caller have to keep the accelerator down, resisting the urge to salt away a lead with safe runs. Supporting cast matters. Receivers must separate, track the ball, and finish. Linemen must create a clean platform. And the opponent matters too. Defensive coordinators have to be just off-tune enough, their adjustments just late enough, their personnel just mismatched enough for a quarterback to string together a once-in-a-generation masterpiece. Even when all that aligns, 7 still asks for a slice of fortune. The tip that doesn't happen, the flag that doesn't fly, the window that stays open for a heartbeat longer than it should. The first time the number was claimed, America was at war, and the NFL was still a smaller, grittier enterprise. It was November 14, 1943, at the Polo Grounds in New York City. The Chicago Bears visited the New York Giants, and Sid Luckman, sharp-eyed, compact, and commanding, walked into a stadium full of coats and fedoras and rewrote the terms of possibility. The average NFL team that year scored about 18 points per game. Passing volume was modest. Attempts rarely cleared 20. Accuracy standards were punishing. Completing even 45% drew praise. And yet Luckman uncorked a performance that felt like it was flown in from the future. He completed 21 passes for 433 yards and 7 touchdowns in a 56-7 demolition. He did it out of George Halas's T formation. Deceptive motion, split backs, timing routes that carved the field into angles the single wing couldn't even dream about. 4 touchdowns arrived before halftime, and each new score seemed to stretch the Giants' defense thinner and thinner until it looked like tracing paper, see-through and fragile. The papers called it an aerial bombardment. Fans who had come to cheer the Giants found themselves clapping for excellence. By season's end, Luckman had thrown 28 touchdowns in only 10 games, tripling the league norm. His 107.5 passer rating was so far ahead of its time that no one would surpass it for 46 years. In the middle of wartime austerity, Luckman offered an abundance of something different. Evidence that the forward pass could be a sustained engine, not a trick. 7 began as a revelation. A decade rolled by before the number resurfaced, and when it did, the name attached to it wasn't one the sport had already crowned. On October 17, 1954, at Griffith Stadium, Adrian Burk of the Philadelphia Eagles, reliable, unglamorous, a study in persistence, threw 19 completions on 27 attempts for 229 yards and 7 touchdowns in a 49-21 win over Washington. By modern standards, 229 yards doesn't break audience counters. But context explains the miracle. In the mid-1950s, league-wide completion percentages lived below 50%, and most teams hovered around 150 passing yards per game. Burk hit 70%, threw a touchdown roughly every 4 attempts, and turned red zone possessions into near certainties. He did it working with Pete Pihos, big-bodied Hall of Fame end with the craft to post up defensive backs, and Bobby Walston, a resourceful receiver kicker who could win both inside leverage and contested balls. Washington's defense wasn't the league's best, but it had pride and professional shape. Burke's timing shredded both. He wasn't revolutionary, he was refinement, proof that as route concepts got sharper and quarterbacks dedicated more time to preparation, precision could be a weapon. Burke finished the year with the kind of symmetrical stat line the 1950s produced: 23 touchdowns, 23 interceptions, but for one afternoon, he touched the same star Luckman had named. If the 1950s were a bridge from rugged football to a more elegant passing game, the early 1960s held a full-on duel for the sport's soul. The American Football League, brash and inventive, challenged the NFL's primacy. On November 19, 1961, in that renegade league, George Blanda, 34, iron-willed, strong-jawed, took the Houston Oilers into a game with the New York Titans and detonated a fireworks show. He completed 23 of 44 passes for 418 yards and 7 touchdowns in a 49-13 blowout, and, in classic Blanda fashion, he kicked the extra points himself. His box score reads like a storm: 7 touchdowns and 5 interceptions. That was the AFL texture. Vertical routes, aggressive reads, go routes stacked on switch releases, the willingness to live with the occasionally wild consequence in exchange for explosive gains. Blanda's season produced 36 touchdown passes, more than any NFL quarterback that year, and the Oilers ended up as AFL champions. For skeptics who dismissed the new league as a carnival act, Blanda's 7 was a courtroom exhibit. See? The competition is real, the skill is high, the style is different but deadly. For Blanda the man, it was another chapter in defying the clock. He would play into his late 40s. For the passing game, it was testimony that a second football culture could push evolution forward by insisting that aggression was a philosophy, not a whim. Only a year later, in the biggest media market in the country, the number was matched with a late career masterpiece. On October 28, 1962, at Yankee Stadium, Y.A. Tittle, balding, lined, and utterly serene, threw 27 completions on 39 attempts for 505 yards and 7 touchdowns, guiding the New York Giants past Washington 49-34. If Burke's 7 was about precision and Blanda's about audacity, Tittle's was about mastery. In an era when the average team barely cleared 180 passing yards, Tittle tripled the norm. His completion rate kissed 70%. His passer rating sat in the rare air just shy of perfect. He made anticipatory throws that looked like prophecies. Del Schaffner's galloping posts and Joe Walton's deft sideline work were met by passes arriving in stride, in rhythm, on time. The city's papers dubbed him the Bald Eagle, aging but aerial, regal in command. He won league MVP, and his 7 became the jewel of the Giants' early 60s run. If Luckman had prophesied, and Burke had validated, and Blanda had dared, Tittle confirmed, the forward pass wasn't flirting with legitimacy. It was the game's spine. 7 then went dormant for years, tucked away like a rare coin whose minting is too costly to repeat. It resurfaced on September 28, 1969 in Minneapolis, when the Minnesota Vikings hosted the Baltimore Colts. Joe Kapp was a paradoxical figure to headline a record, a CFL crossover, a leader known more for toughness than touch, a quarterback whose career completion percentage sat under 50. Against Baltimore, recent NFL champions, loaded with defensive reputation, Kapp completed 28 of 43 throws for 449 yards and 7 touchdowns in a 52-14 avalanche. The astonishing part wasn't merely the total, it was the gap between expectation and result. Kapp's 65% completion rate ran 15 points above his career clip. He fired seam balls and deep sideline outs with an aggression that felt defiant. Gene Washington and John Henderson kept breaking coverage shells, and Kapp kept trusting them. Sports Illustrated called it a storm from the north, and the metaphor matched the feeling of inevitability that swept over Metropolitan Stadium that day. The Vikings announced themselves as a full-fledged power. They would go to the Super Bowl that season, born on the backs of the Purple People Eaters and a quarterback whose voice the huddle trusted. 7, in Kapp's hands, stood for leadership, setting fire to production. And then, silence. From 1969 until 2013, more than 4 decades passed without another 7-touchdown game. It wasn't for lack of passing. In fact, passing boomed. The schedule expanded, practice structures evolved, film study deepened, and rules tilted gently, but unmistakably, toward offense. Illegal contact was more tightly officiated, quarterbacks were protected more aggressively from late hits to the head and knees, and formations grew ever more elastic. 4,000-yard seasons became common, and in certain years, 20 different quarterbacks posted 90-plus passer ratings. If statistical inflation were enough by itself, 7s would have multiplied. They didn't. The reason hides on the other side of the equation: game management and defensive complexity. Coaches salted away wins with clock-killing runs. Coordinators coded coverage disguises that flashed one shell pre-snap and rotated to another at the snap. Personnel groupings specialized so precisely that marginal advantages disappeared. 7 stayed rare because football, for all its evolution, still punished perfection attempts with situational risk. The drought ended spectacularly on the first night of the 2013 season. At Mile High, under primetime lights, the defending champion Baltimore Ravens faced the Denver Broncos, and Peyton Manning, a surgeon with a helmet, a metronome with a right arm, conducted a masterpiece. He completed 27 of 42 passes for 462 yards and 7 touchdowns in a 49-27 win that never stopped accelerating. The names on the receiving end read like a tour through matchup problems. Demaryius Thomas's long striding speed on tunnel screens and posts, Julius Thomas's tight end mismatch work up the seam, Wes Welker's option routes out of the slot. But the real star was orchestration. Manning processed Baltimore's shells like a chess engine, flipped protections, waved receivers tighter or wider by inches, and ripped balls to leverage advantages. 4 touchdowns came in the second half as Denver doubled down on aggression. By year's end, Manning's stat line looked like a typo: 55 touchdowns and 5,477 passing yards, both league records. The 7 on opening night wasn't an accident. It was a preface. It also taught a counterintuitive lesson. Even in an era built to help quarterbacks, 7s still required a conductor with the authority to keep the tempo fast when the script begged for caution. If Manning's 7 was an emperor's decree, this is how it will be, then what came 2 months later was a fairy tale. On November 3, 2013, in Oakland, Nick Foles, a second-year quarterback starting for the injured Michael Vick, completed 22 of 28 passes for 406 yards and 7 touchdowns in a 49-20 blitz. He finished with the elusive perfect passer rating, 158.3, a clean sheet that demands a blend of yards per attempt, touchdowns per attempt, and interception avoidance that almost never aligns. Chip Kelly's offense operated like a treadmill cranked to sprint speed. No huddles, split field reads, packaged plays that married inside zone runs with glance routes and stick concepts. Riley Cooper kept unlocking deep shots. Deshaun Jackson found voids. The Raiders' defense, middle of the pack by season metrics, lost leverage and then lost poise. What elevated Foles' performance from hot streak to historic was absence of error. He didn't offer the defense a bailout throw. He threw on time into windows, respected the called RPO constraints, and punished single high safety looks without inviting robber picks. In a sport that worships pedigree, Foles delivered an afternoon that insisted on a simpler logic. Execution is royalty. Years later, when he authored a Super Bowl win as a backup, the DNA of that performance could be traced back to Oakland. Calm eyes, pure decisions, 7 touchdowns as a thesis statement that low draft position doesn't cap peak performance. 2 seasons after Foles, in a building where noise bounces like trapped thunder, the number arrived again. On November 1st, 2015, in the New Orleans Superdome, Drew Brees, a craftsman of footwork and timing, the sports poet laureate of accuracy, completed 39 of 50 throws for 505 yards and 7 touchdowns in a 52-49 classic against the New York Giants. The game itself became a record: 13 combined touchdown passes, the most ever. Brees' 7 felt like a survey course in the passing tree. He ripped seams to Brandon Cooks, layered throws to Marquez Colston on digs that sat just beyond linebacker fingertips, and found Benjamin Watson in red zone compressions, where ball placement, not separation, decides outcomes. The Giants' defense ranked low that year, but even weak units almost never yielded 7. Brees made improbability look routine. Culturally, the moment meant more. A decade earlier, Brees and Sean Payton had helped not only rebuild a franchise, but helped lift a city's spirit after Hurricane Katrina. Every touchdown that day sounded like a civic memory rekindled. By the time Brees finished his career, he led the league in completions and yards. The 7 stood as one of those Brees-Ian paradoxes: spectacular, and yet built entirely out of ordinary excellence, stacked in perfect order. 8 names, 8 games, 1 number. What ties them isn't a shared style, but a shared outcome under wildly different conditions. Luckman launched the forward pass into the sports center. Burk embodied mid-century precision when such precision was rare. Blanda proved that a new league's aggression could be championship caliber. Tittle painted a Renaissance master's portrait late in life. Kapp turned leadership combustion into a statistical supernova. Manning declared that football intellect could script inevitability. Foles reminded the league that system mastery plus poise could erase pedigree. Brees offered a tutorial in timing so flawless it felt like choreography. The statistics detail the feat: 433 yards here, 229 there, 418, 505, 449, 462, 406, 505, but numbers don't convey the feeling that circulates in a stadium when a 7th touchdown lands. The hush before the snap, the intake when the ball leaves the hand, the eruption, and then the strange, reverent quiet as fans realize they've drifted into history's current. Why has no one thrown 8? On paper, the modern game seems to invite it. Passing rates are at historic highs, and red zone efficiency metrics let coaches hunt matchups like truffle pigs. But the paper ignores culture. NFL coaches are guardians of probability. They protect wins more than they chase photo plates in the record book. Build a 3-score lead, and self-scout says run the ball, kill clock, avoid the turnover sequence that breathes life into an opponent. Pull your starter out of harm's way. Give the backup real snaps. This conservatism is rational, and it trims the long tail off individual stat lines. On defense, disguises have grown baroque. Pre-snap, safeties sugar down to threaten quarters, then sprint back to Tampa 2. Linebackers mug A-gaps, then bail. Mug fronts bluff simulated pressure. Spins and rotations are timed to the quarterback's cadence. Offenses are better, yes, but defenses are cunning in ways that don't always show up in raw totals. They're designed to erase your number 1 constraint, to turn a quarterback's first 2 reads to dust and dare him to hold the ball 1 count too long. 8 asks a quarterback to remain perfect through all that, and it asks a coach to keep pushing when prudence whispers otherwise. And because records mean more when they illuminate the people who chase them, consider how each 7 rippled outward. The Bears under Luckman didn't just score points, They forced defenses to redraw their chalkboards. Linebackers who had been box dwellers learned to carry verticals. Safeties practiced reading the quarterback's eyes a half-beat earlier. Pass rush plans added contain rules for moving pockets born from the T. Philadelphia, after Burk treated quick game concepts with new respect, adjusting splits to create free access throws that were once considered indulgent. Houston, riding Blanda's audacity, validated the AFL's claim that innovation was not a gimmick, but a path. Motion at the snap, multiple verticals from stacked alignments, option routes, to punish leverage. The Giants with Tittle built a library of timing tapes for younger passers. You can chart a line from Tittle's footwork to the precise rhythmic drops of West Coast adherents decades later. Minnesota with Kapp reaffirmed that leadership is an input you can't model but you can feel. The ball leaves hotter when the huddle believes. Denver with Manning institutionalized autonomy, proving that when a quarterback's eyes are as valuable as the coordinators, no huddle can be a scalpel rather than a stunt. Philadelphia with Foles made the RPO vocabulary mainstream to audiences who hadn't yet named it, teaching them that runs and passes can share a heartbeat. New Orleans with Brees offered a reminder that accuracy is a superpower that ages well, because footwork and eyes can keep refining even as raw speed fades. There is also the question of sustainability versus spike. 7 is a spike by definition, a towering outlier, but hidden in those afternoons are clues about what scales. Luckman's system scaled. The league adopted it. Burke's precision scaled. Completion percentages have climbed decade over decade, a tide lifting all passers. Blanda's aggression, domesticated and studied, became today's analytics-driven fourth down calculus and early down pass preference. Tittle's late career flourish scaled into a modern truth. Cognitive speed can outrun biological age for a while. Kapp's moment reads like an exception, but it scaled in a subtler way. Teams chase intangible chemistry because, on certain days, belief does real math on the scoreboard. Manning's command scaled into league-wide pre-snap empowerment, with more quarterbacks entrusted to can, kill, flip, or freeze a play. Foles' perfection scaled into staff philosophies that built second-play identities, what happens after the defense wins the first picture. Brees' body of work scaled into a generation that treats timing not as a constraint, but as a weapon. You can't schedule 7. You can build the conditions that make it imaginable. If you were in the building for any of those games, you remember the strange feeling that descends around the 5th touchdown. The scoreboard says blowout or shootout, but the crowd senses anomalies. Phones appear. Strangers nudge each other with grins that ask, "Are we really seeing this?" Coaches on headsets begin invoking superstition. Writers ditch their first drafts and start reverse engineering "where does this rank?" paragraphs. Defenders on the wrong end feel the floor tilt. Every call they make feels one step behind a quarterback who is thinking 2 moves ahead. By the 6th, attention narrows. The field is the whole world. By the 7th, it's not cheers you hear first, but the intake, a sharp breath in, because rare things hush people before they make them shout. So the number waits, patient and proud, on its 8 pedestals. Luckman in a war-shadowed autumn demonstrating that the pass could be a profession. Burk showing that precision was a weapon available to any craftsman with timing and courage. Blanda proving that a Challenger League's bravado could be more than bravado. Tittle painting a masterpiece at an age when muscles ache and reflexes supposedly slow. Kapp turning stubborn belief into a scoreboard that looked like fiction. Manning declaring that neck scars did not erase royalty. Foles teaching that readiness is a kind of genius. Brees making geometry sing. They look out across eras and invite challengers to climb. Maybe no one adds an 8th pedestal. Maybe someone does. Either way, 7 keeps doing what it has always done. It makes us watch closely, argue joyfully, measure carefully, and remember vividly. In the end, 7 touchdown passes in a single game is less a statistic than a portrait of a quarterback in total command, of teammates executing with ruthless clarity, of coaches trusting the air over the ground, of a defense that cannot stanch the bleeding, and of a sport that, despite its appetite for order, still makes room for the sublime. It is the kind of feat that asks you decades later to name the day, the stadium, the opponent, the feeling in your chest when the ball crossed the plane for the 7th time. It is the kind of feat that turns an ordinary Sunday into a landmark. And until that hypothetical day when someone dares fate and finds an 8th, 7 will remain football's rarest song, 8 verses long, sung in different keys, identical in their refrain. On certain afternoons, perfection doesn't just visit. It stays long enough to write itself into history.